There we go. All right, so greetings, everyone. Again, thank you for joining us today in this Green Building Forum on our energy future. We've been fortunate enough to have pretty consistent meetings with the regulatory authority and Denton Williams in particular, and I had an opportunity to talk about things regarding the current energy IRP, and it's been sharing with us the RA's plans to update the current IRP. So we thought it would be great to provide this opportunity to share that information. I know that there are plans for the RA to release this publicly come the end of the month. So everyone who attends the GBFs today is kind of getting insight before everyone else. So you're getting first dibs on the information. And maybe not first, but you're early up on the list. So, but yeah, so obviously Green Rock, we were very strong advocates around renewable energy during the public consultation a few years ago. That's publicly known. And it's been great really just collaborating and speaking with the RA about how we can actually tangibly make that happen. So I think it was pretty clear from the public consultation a few years ago that the broader community is really interested in seeing us being able to make a shift to renewables. And it's one thing to have the idea, and it's a totally different thing to actually achieve it. And I think right now, the messaging that we want to get out into the public domain is that everyone can actually play an active role in the process. There are a lot of things that can positively contribute to the process, and that's where it gives everyone an opportunity to be involved in some way or the other. So hopefully we can learn a lot from Denton's presentation today. I encourage everyone to ask as many questions as possible. The goal of this forum is for us to gain clarity and to learn and be able to leave with new insights that we can share with our family, friends, and colleagues. So give thanks for attending. I will continue to add people in as they join. And without further ado, I will welcome Denton Williams, who is the CEO of the Regulatory Authority. Give thanks, Denton.
Thank you, Eugene. So thank you everybody for first and let me have a little slice of your time, and overall for being available to hear what I have to say about the Integrated Resource Plan. So just a little bit of backstory. The Regulatory Authority is the regulator charged with regulating electricity, electronic communications, submarine communications cables, and possibly in the future, a couple more industries. But today I wanted to focus on the Integrated Resource Plan. And just so you have an overview, my intent is to just very quickly recap the current Integrated Resource Plan, and then talk to you about how we wish to improve on the process, and give you a chance to give input into that process before the Integrated Resource Plan is developed. So, without any other
be careful.
Any further ado, I'm going to share basically a page out of the Integrated Resource Plan, which shows the output and graphical format of that process the last time around. So can everyone see my screen?
Yes, yes.
So ultimately, the RA decided to choose out of the various scenarios that were available, scenario 1D. 1D is a scenario that contemplated adding up to 85% renewables by 2035. And the time frame for the Integrated Resource Plan was 2020 to 2040. And the major difference between 1D and the other scenarios, and I'll let you read the IRP if you haven't, it's available on the RA's website. You just go to electricity, to the sectors, and go to electricity, and you'll see Integrated Resource Plan. And the main major difference between this scenario and fossil fuel. One of the alternatives that the RA had to consider was whether, in our goal to increase renewable energy penetration, we would use a bridging fuel such as ethane or LNG or even more propane. We have propane already in Bermuda. That ultimately was rejected as an option. It's primarily because the commitment to the lifetime of those assets is significant. So as an example, a natural gas receiving terminal, bulk storage and regasification facility, pipeline to multiple generating facilities, including Belco, those assets have a typical lifespan of 40 to 50 years. So in theory, we'd either be committing the country to 40 to 50 years of fossil fuels, or we'd be committing to spending the money, but then having to write it off midway. So either way, we wouldn't avoid the cost of that infrastructure, and we felt it was more of a financial impediment to making a clean transition, excuse the pun, to renewable energy. So for financial reasons, he said it would be more effective to remain with the fossil fuels and just transition directly as much as possible to renewable energy. So what I have here is a page out of the Integrated Resource Plan. I believe it is, get the exact page number for you, page 6. This is in the executive summary. But this timeline here illustrates it nicely. And that you can see that based on where we are now, 2021, there should be a 6 megawatt solar array. And basically that is the array at the airport. In 2023, we're hoping for another 15 megawatts of utility scale solar. And it's important to note that the IRP doesn't have a hard cap on capacity in the distributed sense. So businesses, customers, residential or otherwise, they can build their own solar, and it's not capped by the Integrated Resource Plan. So that's why it's not in here directly. And then by 2026, we'd like to see the first 50 megawatts of wind come on board, and then we think the development will be finished in the subsequent year. Another 10 megawatts of wind. That's an interesting effort. So as Eugene mentioned earlier, it's one thing to have a plan, but then when you try to implement it, you run into reality, or as they say in the Army, no plan survives contact with the enemy. Well, for us, the enemy was financing, and we weren't able to, for the first year that we needed to in 2020, to raise the financing we needed to implement the studies necessary to go forward with the wind resource. We have done that now. It was very controversial. I'm sure several of you may have seen that in a newspaper or even seen it on your electricity bill, because our fee increased, and we fully intend to remove that once we've completed our studies. So moving along, you see on the bottom of this, the retirement of some various power stations. And these are basically the Belco fuel oil power stations. LFO means light fuel oil, which effectively is ultra low sulfur diesel. And then HFO is heavy fuel oil, which is a residual fuel that comes from a distillation process as a residual product. So this is the indicative timeline. As you can see, roughly the build out for the renewables is just about done by 2035. So that's kind of where we are with the current IRP, and various procurement processes have started, and studies to support procurement processes have started. The solar process, procurement process is actively underway, and the wind part of it is in the desktop study phase, which we expect to have complete in August, which is important because it will directly feed into the next IRP, and it will also launch a metallurgical study where we actually measure the wind speeds over the course of an entire year. So that's basically it. So this is, in a snapshot, the first integrated resource plan. And the reason I wanted to bring this up was that this is where we wound after a rather, I'll say, convoluted process. And it happened because the initial guidance provided to Belco was only the statutory requirements. So it left the potential developments very, very, very wide open. But it didn't pull very, how shall I say it? It wasn't very explicit on what is prohibited, what isn't prohibited, and what sort of technologies or methodologies should be included or excluded. So this time around, we actually will be doing that. So I'm gonna stop this really quickly, and then I'm gonna switch over to our new integrated resource plan process. So bear with me for a moment. Okay. We're just going to go through our aims, our expectations, the IRP process in a little bit more detail, and then the main part of it, the IRP guidance. So I guess the biggest takeaway from this is to recognize that we have to come up with something that is executable, something we can actually do, and it's not some flight of fancy and can't be accomplished. So it has three primary objectives. So we want to improve the lowest cost of electricity capacity while meeting all our other goals. So there are some trade-offs that we have to make. If we were strictly going for the lowest energy possible, we would probably not be in an environmentally sustainable position. So that's one thing to note. So we have to assess the economic, environmental, and social implications of not only this plan, but also alternatives. So we actually solicit alternative IRPs. And that's where we evaluate the merits of these applications of IPPs or other licensees. So IPPs are independent power producers. So if you look at the solar array at the airport, they are independent of the network operator, the Belco. So they are an IPP. And you look at other deviations that may be considered or not. So, and we had to look at their value to the system and what costs and risks they bring. So we're trying to make sure that we engage as many people as possible. And we want to make sure that we have the facts available so that people can duly respond to the IRP process. We need to identify Bermuda's electricity requirements and the expected costs on a system scale of that system and alternatives. We need to also provide the economic and technical information to meet the objectives of the Electricity Act, the electricity policies, and any other regulations that exist, while enabling decisions to be made, in the broader interest. And then, sometimes, like I said earlier, some practical alternatives will involve trade-offs, right? Like, something that is clean may be more expensive, but not necessarily so. But in some cases, you may need to have some trade-offs between, competing objectives. The typical ones that are competing are cleaner energy versus lower cost energy. So this is the IRP process. So in Q3 of this year, the RA will solicit input into the IRP guidance, and that will then be provided to Belco to officially launch the first draft of the IRP also in Q3. And then hopefully by the end of Q4, because we know this is an aggressive timeline, Belco, the TD&R aspect, will submit its proposal back to the RA. The RA will then review that IRP and then put out a request for alternatives and for comment so that the public can do that. I think Eugene was actively involved in the first round in submitting an alternative IRP, which was a significant input into the final IRP. So it's a good example of the citizens, giving input into the process and significantly influeing it. So I think that was a good outcome. And then we'll have a consultation on these alternative proposals, if any are received. And from here on, it's an iterative process until the IRP satisfies the Board of Commissioners that it is ready for authorization to proceed. So we don't have fixed timelines on some of these things because they can vary based on decisions or quality of what's submitted, because it could be cyclical, but by providing more information up front, we think it should actually be more effective, because a lot of the things that should be considered will be stated up front. This slide you don't have to be terribly concerned about. I can make this deck available to Eugene, and maybe you can circulate it if anyone wants it. But this is just basically the process on how the IRP is built out as a flow chart. So it shows two streams primarily, one for the IRP consultation, the other one for alternatives. And then at the end of the day, we wind up with a final IRP. But this will be available to everyone if anyone wants to have it. And this is the most important thing for us at this point in time, is that the guidance that's provided to build the new IRP. So the first part of it is the assumptions. So the time frame is 2021 to 2041, so 20-year window. Target is 100% renewable energy. And 100% elimination of heavy fuel oil. There is a provision for a nominal supply of diesel or propane or similar light fuel for backup power, and asking how much will be required. And then in August, as I mentioned earlier, the RA's desktop wind study will be complete, and then it will become an input into this process as well, so that the wind aspect of it in Bermuda would be more accurate and tuned to Bermuda's, geography. And then we have some prohibitions. The first one is nuclear energy. There are several reasons not to do it. The main one is actually not necessarily catastrophic failure, which I'm sure comes to mind for a lot of people. But what do you do with the waste, right? If you think about Bermuda, we have a hard time getting rid of asbestos. So to have radioactive material and to consider how we're going to get rid of that, obviously you have to heavily rely on some third-party country to receive our nuclear waste, et cetera. So it has a lot of downsides for us. And a lot of times nuclear energy is not as cost-effective as people may think. Typical project winds up being 2 to 3 times or more expensive than originally designed. So we have under prohibitions as well, heavy fuel oil, but it is allowed for the transition. The reality is we are using heavy fuel oil now, and so it's just realistic and pragmatic to consider how do we move from it rather than just blindly saying, no, tomorrow you have to not use it, because all that will result in is people just ignoring it, because we still need to produce electricity. 2 other prohibitions are natural gas and ethane, and the main reasons for those, because they are less carbon intensive by about 2/3. But the main reason for those is the asset costs. So they're both cryogenic fuels. They need to be kept extremely cold. And you need obviously off-take facilities. And a lot of these assets are very expensive and have a very long lifespan. So rather than having to write off a bunch of, as I mentioned earlier, a bunch of non-productive assets later, we're just going to bypass them entirely. And then on the supply side, supply side, just for industry jargon, is utility scale or industry production side, and not non-customer side development of energy. So several scenarios here. Fixed mounted wind turbines, so there's like pylons that are in the ground or in the ocean, but attached to the seabed somehow. Floating wind turbines can be considered, and they have their challenges. Utility scale, land-based and floating solar PV, this is photovoltaic. Fuel cells can be considered, biomass, wave power, ocean thermal, battery energy storage systems. Now, really, it literally is a storage system. It doesn't produce or convert energy, energy. It really just takes what you have, converts it to chemical and back to electrical. Hydrogen, and this can be through proton exchange membrane electrolysis or other alternatives, but not hydrogen that's produced from fossil fuels. Reversible fuel cells, grid improvements, so you can make reductions in losses. Higher operating voltages, either on a macro level or for single spot deployment. On the T&D side as well, there's voltage and VAR management, and then also other resources. Other resources could be things that are not considered this time in the guidance, but might be compatible. But this is meant to be fairly broad and to encourage these technologies to be evaluated. On the demand side, this is the customer side of things. The first step is energy efficiency, and this is a great forum for that. We want to strongly encourage building energy efficiency, and also to the extent it's possible, if you look at my bullet number 3, distributed solar, if you have new builds or builds from scratch or significant renovations, et cetera, we strongly encourage solar deployment on those buildings. Conservation is another one, and these are meant to be programs that are executed over a significant amount of time to encourage whether it's residential or business customers to either upgrade equipment, which is energy efficiency, or to alter behavior, which is conservation. Battery energy storage systems. So just like on the supply side, you can have battery energy storage systems on the customer side. This is readily available today, and they can be aggregated and operate in tandem to benefit of the greater grid. So those are things that can be considered. Electric vehicles, import and export, smart charging versus non-smart charging. Very high level. Smart charging is superior provided the infrastructure is there to send signals. Vehicle to grid, so exporting from your vehicle back onto the grid, and vehicle to home. Just from our internal discussions, we're focusing on vehicle to home first, because we think there's a lot of value in the resiliency that people can have if the main grid goes down after a hurricane, but you have an electric vehicle. You can once a methodology has been established, you can readily take power from your vehicle and power your home, or select devices in your home, or select circuits. And then when the vehicle gets a little low on power, you might just go down to a public charging facility, quickly do a rapid recharge, and then go back home. Mainly because the restoration times after hurricanes typically can be, for most people, it's within a couple of days, and then the last batch of people to be restored tend to be out around a week. So we think vehicle to home is an easy win for electric vehicle users, and is actually another reason to own an electric vehicle other than the other benefits it has. And then demand response. Demand response is where the consumers respond to signals from the utility to alter their behavior to help the utility to navigate challenges on the grid. Typically, that's a financial program where you're rewarded for your participation. An example would be a demand response signal is sent out, and building managers reduce the temperature set point or increase it, if you want to say it that way, but probably just turn it off for the HVAC systems to reduce the load for the next 30 minutes or something like that. Typically 15 minutes, most people won't even notice that the air conditioning system is not cooling as long as the ventilation is still running. So things like that. And then other things that will be considered kind of in parallel, but will be affected by and affect the IRP are the tariffs. So electric vehicle public charging tariff, if there's going to be any adoption, it's going to happen organically, which it has been, or it's going to be accelerated. Either way, at some point, if it's to be sustainable, there needs to be some way to publicly charge your vehicle. It's not realistic to think that people are going to 100% only charge at home. So that's something that the RA is actively looking into. Some other tariffs, like a low income tariff, because we want to avoid energy poverty. Time of use tariffs, particularly once a lot of the variable renewables come into effect. We expect those tariffs to then become meaningful and would be rolled out accordingly, and people can opt into them or not, because many times they can be complex, and some people just choose to have a flat rate for simplicity. Demand response tariff, as I mentioned, you can be rewarded for participating, and then a vehicle to grid tariff, but I think that's probably a lot further away because it's a quite involved topic. And then just time frames, what's near term, 0 to 5 years, mid 6 to 10, and then long term, we consider 11 to 20 years. And what do we think we're going to be able to deliver in those first years? And then in the midterm, we'd like to be in excess of 60% of our deliverables. So we're trying to drive as cost effectively as possible, but we're trying to drive as much of an increase in renewables sooner than later. So those are the main things. And then outputs, we should see a 20-year demand projection for energy, 20-year generation projection, including any reserve capacity. So if we have variable resources in the renewables, think of solar, it's wonderful on a great sunny day, but it's obviously gone at night. So you need to have an alternative during the night, whether it's battery capacity or it's some other generating facility or it's wind that has picked up because it's nighttime, et cetera. 20-year transmission capital plan and alternative topologies. One of the things that the RA has identified is that the most suitable locations in Bermuda are the most incompatible with the transmission grid. So it's a little bit of a conundrum, but we might need to alter or enhance, is probably more the correct way of doing it, to enhance the transmission grid to increase the ability to move large amounts of power around the network. So you might get a large amount of power coming out of the east during the day, and then large amounts of power coming out of the west during the night, and some combination of that, during other times where they overlap. Okay, and then the distribution capital plan. So, do we need to put in inverters on a distribution network to improve VAR protection or VAR management? Do we need to do other changes like transformer sizes need to increase because we think there's going to be a larger number of solar distributed generators? Things like that need to be factored into there, plus regular O&M and capital investment. Alternatives, right? So electric vehicles instead of internal combustion, as an example. Another one is if you have an electric range, is a more appropriate use of propane range. So you can look at it in other ways. Electric vehicle uptake program. So with a target, Bermuda officially doesn't have a significant goal or program in place to incentivize and increase the rate of adoption. We do have some incentives. I don't want to say there are none. We have zero duties on electric vehicles and their parts, and I think the charging equipment as well, which is excellent. But a systematic program educating the public about the benefits of it and the benefits of EV conversion over time, in that as you move more demand onto the T&D network, that increased demand results in lower pressure on the existing tariffs. So there's a significant benefit while still being cheaper than the cost of traditional fuels. And then they also have to have produced timelines. What are the benefits of that particular IRP? What are the risks and potential obstacles, and a proposed procurement plan. And then other things in there, non-utility scale resources that are under development. There will be some amendments coming out to the Electricity Act that will create a sandbox that allow non-commercial technologies to be evaluated and tested at a scale that would not threaten the integrity of the grid. The grid, just for everyone's knowledge, but I'm sure most of you know already, constantly has to be balanced. If it's not balanced, it will collapse, as we unfortunately found out in December. So this sandbox will allow things to be developed like wind and floating solar and other things that people want to do, so that they can operate without putting the rest of the system at risk. So if they fail, they're not failing in a way that causes a collapse or some undue harm to the rest of the customers. And that's it. So I know I did a kind of a speed presentation there, but I just really want everyone, a high level overview of what we've done in the past and what we're planning to do in the near future. And the guidance that I laid out there will all be in a formal RA document for public comment. And I encourage everyone to respond if you wish to give us input, and we'll give it consideration. And yeah, that's where we are. So I'm happy to take questions, and yeah, that's it.
All right, if you could just end your share, Denton. All right, thank you. All right. Great. All right, so thank you for the presentation. I guess the main thing with the Green Building Forum is for us to stimulate conversation. So that's the whole idea here. So, in addition to questions, if anybody has any thoughts or ideas, if it's anything that you're doing at the moment in your company or personally that can contribute to the conversation or help to enlighten people around these topics, then just feel free to share. I had a couple questions for you though, Denton, just to kind of get it started and get it going. Let me just change the view here. Yeah, so in reference to the new IRP, do you expect some of the same proposals that were submitted in the last IRP to kind of be updated and resubmitted? Or are some of those kind of just not viable anymore based on decisions that already been made?
I think it's a bit of a mixture. So I do expect that wind would be resubmitted, solar would be resubmitted. I don't expect to see a natural gas submission. I'd be pretty surprised, I'll put it that way. But I think new things or some things that may have been considered, but the scope of them was probably too broad at the time, may be reconsidered. So I'll give an example. I think there was an IRP proposal that envisioned a total redesign of the T&D network and a completely hydrogen-based energy network, which is way beyond what we can afford. but aspects of that might be reconsidered. And I mentioned, the the proton exchange membrane, fuel cells, and hydrolysis. Those are things that might be reconsidered, but they have to be looked at obviously within the context of how much do they cost, reliability, et cetera. I'm not sure if anyone has actually seen some of the more modern fuel cells in operation, but they're very quiet. They produce basically, if your main input is air and hydrogen, they're basically producing steam. They don't really have many, if any, moving parts. But at the time when I saw them, they were on the cusp of cost effectiveness. So we want to take another look and see how far has the technology progressed since then. And some of these resources are reversible. So these PEM technologies, you can produce hydrogen with them, well, hydrogen and oxygen technically, but you can also recombine it and produce electricity off the same facility. So that, in theory, is a good complementary technology for something that tends to be fairly volatile like wind. Because what you want to do is capture as much of that volatile energy and store it, and in this case in a chemical form like hydrogen, and then convert it back when you actually need it and there's some demand for it. So there could be some different scenarios for consideration or resubmission of some technologies that were previously submitted but weren't really viable then. But we'll just have to wait and see. Another one is, wave resources. So there are several developments happening globally in wave. And if someone can show something that's meaningful, then it should be considered. I'll just share one of my personal views. One of the things I'm least interested in myself is any significant biomass plant. We already basically have one at Tynes Bay. So to build several more, while they would be largely free of the metal issues, the heavy metals, et cetera, and tar issues you get from existing heavy fuel oil plants, they still produce particulates, they still produce other less than desirable outputs. So they're in there in the current IRP, but maybe they go away depending on how this next round goes.
All right. So other than the biomass, which you named explicitly, and I guess the LNG, like what are the key differences that you're looking for in terms of proposals this time around versus 2 years ago? Like, would you say there are key things that you're looking for that you weren't necessarily looking for before?
Yeah, so the biggest difference is that our target is now 100% renewable energy. And I know in many circles, that would be driven by the desire to have clean energy. We do have that desire, but we also want to disconnect from the volatile oil world. So we want to deal with two issues by doing that. So, what we will trade off is the kind of lower capital costs upfront and longer, more expensive marginal costs of fuel. And you can see that in your the fuel adjustment because it keeps fluctuating. And that's just largely the impact of, market forces and taxes. Those are the two biggest inputs into that. And then when you trade off to renewables, the trade-off typically is higher capital costs up front, but very little cost for your marginal energy. So if you think of it like today, you don't have an electric vehicle, and let's say we had 100% renewable grid, the effort for you the extra cost to charge that electric vehicle, other than its use of the infrastructure, is practically zero because there's no extra input being put into the system to produce that energy. If anything, you might be using the system more efficiently. And that's why in some jurisdictions they have actually gone to negative electricity rates at some points in day to encourage people to consume energy during those times. So we're definitely heading into a different type of price environment as new assets actually get deployed and come online. But those are examples of how things will probably change again into the future.
All right. And I just have one more question was, I noticed you mentioned about the desktop study that's ongoing. And yes, that was, it generated quite a bit of conversation the way it was released. But what further studies around the event will be required after that's completed in Q3 of this year? Is that pretty much it? Or do we have to take that data and then go into like a next round of kind of investigating and research before we get to a point of deployment?
Yeah, so you're correct that the desktop study is obviously going on. That is just the first step. Once we've done that, then the next step would be to actually measure actual wind speeds. And what we will be doing, provided the desktop study says that it does make sense to proceed, would be to locate a LiDAR buoy and measure the wind at various strata going up, so that we can see where the optimum wind speed locations are, what they typically are, how much they vary by, how much does the wind change in terms of direction, and even capturing, significant events, because we have them, right? We do have hurricanes, we do have windstorms, which are practically hurricanes in terms of intensity in many cases. So the next step would be to do that. And that's the meteorological study, or MET study. And that's the expensive part, unfortunately. But once that's done, the whole reason that we're even doing it, instead of having the investors do it, is that the scale that we're looking at is around 60 megawatts. We're competing for interest with people that are trying to build 0.5 gigawatt wind farms, right? So what we're trying to do is to de-risk the project so that they don't have to gamble on the wind side of it, and with the studies and the evaluation. That information will be available to everybody that's trying to procure the resources or offer the resources. And it will make it that much more attractive that they don't have to spend, the $1.5 million or whatever to do this study. Has already been done, and it's available for free, for a fee though, but not for, I'm trying to offset some of those costs. But it's there, and they can just look at that, and they can make their technical decisions, financial decisions, and make an offer or not, and go from there.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Okay, thanks, Denton. Anyone else have any other questions? I don't want to be seeming to hold the mic.
Hi, Jane. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, Karen. We can't hear you much.
Okay. Is that better?
That's much better. Thank you.
Better? Okay. Thank you. Denton, thank you for the presentation. I found that really helpful, and that was very interesting. Two questions. They're completely different. Just one on the financial side. And you might have said this before, but in terms of the various projects, the wind, the solar, you mentioned a bunch. Is the idea that they're 100% funded by investors, local investors, or is there sort of a quasi part government funded, part investor?
Hi, Karen. You're dropping right out.
Yeah, your audio started to go again, Karen. So if you could just repeat the question. Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, in terms of the funding for the various projects, is the idea that they're 100% funded by local investors, or is there some government participation?
Okay, so financing for projects, is it 100% local or other, I guess?
Yes.
Okay. So we are largely neutral to financing, as long as it's reliable financing and it's not put Bermuda at risk. So, financing coming out of a shady jurisdiction would probably not be received very well. Yeah, obviously you have to do our KYC part of the license application process. But we would actually strongly encourage local investment. Well, obviously we can't make people invest, but that's why we're trying to de-risk it. So local investment is actually, in my view, superior to external investment because we don't have some of the costs associated in terms of perspective. Someone from the US, as an example, looking at Bermuda will see us as having a foreign jurisdiction risk and want to be paid for that. And in Bermuda, we are the jurisdiction and everybody else is foreign. So, that immediately saves you some money, right? So to the extent we can have local investors, that's fantastic. We would strongly encourage.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question, Gary,
you're gonna need it. I'm not sure what's happening to your mic again, but if you could speak up a bit more so we get it. Thanks.
Is this better? Is it better?
No, it got worse actually.
Okay. How about now?
Is that better at all?
Oh, that's great.
Okay. Apologize for the problems. Just in terms of residential solar for the homes, do you know if, and I'm interested because I'm doing a renovation and I'd like to get solar. It is quite expensive though. And I'm just wondering, are you aware of any government incentives to lower the cost for residential solar? I remember years ago, I think there was some reduction government offered at that time and then that stopped. Just wondering if you had any information on that.
Yes, I definitely do. So in terms of residential solar, I think it applies to business as well, but specifically the equipment and all of the associated related, not just the panels, but the inverters and hardware, they're all duty-free, I believe, for a solar system. And then on top of that, the government currently, through a program implemented by the Department of Energy, I believe, out of the Ministry of Home Affairs, has a rebate program. So, and it's tiered. So if you have a very high ARV home and you deploy solar, then you get a kind of modest rebate if it's installed by a certified installer. But if you have a lower ARV home, the government offers a significantly larger rebate. And I think it can be up to $8,000, which is very meaningful. So yeah, there are some programs and I think they are very, very balanced, it appears. I couldn't speak to rates of adoption or anything like that. That's definitely not my wheelhouse, but I do know that they are there.
Denton, thank you for that. Which department did you say is offering the rebate if I wanted to get more information?
It's the Department of Energy, and I see that Aaron's just posted something in the chat with a link to more information. So thanks, Aaron.
All right, wonderful. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, Karen. And just because you're mentioning price, and I know, Stuart's in the room from B Solar as well, but there is another nonprofit organization that has entered into the market, Sunnyside Solar, I believe. We're actually meant to meet with them next week to talk a bit more about what they're doing to get a better understanding, but they have some very interesting offers working with the government rebate system that, where you can, get some significant savings on your system. My understanding to date is that they've kind of separated the sale of the system and the installation of the system. Actually, my understanding is they kind of, you can install your own system or they can work with you to install your own system. So anyway, I know that they've deployed strategies that help to keep the cost down. So that may be something you may want to look into as well, Karen, Sunnyside Solar.
Yeah, and I would also encourage, to look at all of them, right? So Everybody has their own value proposition. Some offer financing, et cetera. So if you don't necessarily have all of the financial resources available on day one, they can work with you. So I would encourage all of them, not just Sunnyside, but to look at all of them. And just like you shop for anything else, shop around, see what you can find. But don't forget the government's program. I think that's a good program that they have in effect. And Aaron put a link there, so hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, that's perfect. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, does anyone else have any other questions?
Yes, good afternoon. How's everyone today?
Greetings, Mr. Crinler.
Greetings, afternoon.
Afternoon. Thank you for that, Denton. Fantastic to hear about some of the initiatives. It'd be great to see 60% of new cars, or albeit 60% of cars on the road, be EVs by 2030, hopefully even sooner. And pardon as I look up at the screen at the same time as I talk. So I wanted to ask about that because currently, right now, the majority of information and things that we're getting for EVs. So in our fleet, we've got 3 EVs. We had 4, unfortunately, there was an accident that we couldn't use that anymore. And you probably know that the 100 is, I think, 1 inch too large. So it becomes an intermediate license plate versus the gas version, which is a light, which is a small example of, it's $1,000 difference to annual licensing costs. And we know that if you want to get a EV, if you drive a B or C class vehicle and you want to get an EV, currently you've got to buy a class E or a class F. So there's these obstacles that hopefully will be addressed. But on a technical side, for a business, if we want to get a electric flatbed truck, like a pickup type truck, which certainly we at BSolo want to do, and I imagine a lot of other businesses do, it's really difficult to find clarity in options that are out there, number one. And number two, in terms of vehicle to home charging, this is absolutely where we need to go. But again, there doesn't seem to be a lot of clarity in what options are there and what options are going to be acceptable for Bermuda's grid. So, is the RA or other government institutions perhaps going to get involved to assist more and enable more for these things to happen?
Sorry, I'll have myself on mute. So sure. So on the first part, I think the RA would love to be more involved in electric vehicles, but there's like this kind of dotted line with the transportation aspect of it. So, we can give our thoughts and information, which we have to the Minister of Home Affairs, but the Minister of Home Affairs is no longer jointly responsible for transportation and energy. So they were split. And so there's a bit of a separation there. And we are going to try to work with as many other agencies as necessary to try and move it forward. We also see that some of the adoption challenges are just really coming down to options and what manufacturers are producing. I mean, I think just recently Ford F-150 is now electric, great as a commercial vehicle. I don't think Ford F-150s were inexpensive to start with, so they might not be the best choice. But I think over time, more will become available as primarily, personal vehicles, it seems, that are electrified first. But you do see in large jurisdictions like the US that a lot of parcel delivery companies and online like Amazon, et cetera, are committed to switching their fleets over time, but they are looking to switch their fleets. I think FedEx as well. So there is definitely a move on, I believe, in the UK and also in Europe. There are certain bans coming that internal combustion will be prohibited. So I strongly suspect that the supply side of electric vehicles is going to become very strong. And as people are starting to catch up, which I think was the original mission of Tesla, was to actually stimulate competition. And I think that as the other vendors are starting to get it together, I'll call it that, more options will become available over time. I think over the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to be kind of starting to get swamped in options. And that will come to Bermuda in one form or the other. We do have some policy decisions to make on the transportation side. I'm a little bit more radical when it comes to that, and that I think that to the extent we want to see this transition happen, then licensing fee structure for EVs should change, and even being entirely waived for certain sizes of EVs. So smaller EVs, maybe there's nothing or just a nominal amount to cover basic administration costs, but significantly discounted even at the larger EV size versus traditional G or H or whatever class vehicle. So and the other part of it is the supporting infrastructure. So the RA has indicated to Belco that we are looking to receive proposals from them, and we're going to provide them with more guidance on public vehicle charging infrastructure. And we also in talks with the Ministry of Home Affairs about what amendments might need to be made to the Electricity Act. We don't know that this is really something that you need to have a regulator setting a public charging electricity price, because most people will have the facility at home. Not all, but most will have the facility at home, and so you really kind of regulate the price by setting an anchor price at home. So public charging may or may not need an actual tariff, but we're going through a process to determine that. So lots of things happening there. We could be very cautious and analyze every step of the way and try to make policy to match. But I think this is one of those things where there are other tangential benefits, like reducing the pressure on other electricity rates, that warrant us kind of pulling out the stops and people to switch in mass. But like I said, we also had to play within our playground, but give our thoughts to others that are willing to listen to us. And you might have seen an example of that. We had conversations with the airport recently, and we're strong believers that the airport, the BAA specifically, also think that there's strong possibilities with utilization of the land that they have available either on the airport premises directly or around for solar PV. And we're talking about multiple tens of megawatts worth of energy potentially. So we'll see where that goes, but that's an example of us reaching out to another authority to kind of share knowledge so that we can keep moving forward.
Yeah, appreciate that.
If I can piggyback on information, sorry, I just added there, and just to reinforce what Denton was saying. So your questions, Stuart, obviously are related to the Ministry of Transport. And I can tell you that the Department of Energy, thanks to my minister, who was the previous Minister for Transport and is keen on the issue, are supporting the Ministry of Transport in discussing some of the issues and topics you raised, Stuart. So whether it's vehicle licensing and changing of vehicle licensing for EVs, changing the rates, changing the classes, looking at the challenges in terms of availability of models, et cetera, based on the sizing restrictions under the Motor Car Act. So with the support of RMI again and their e-mobility team, we're fully engaged with the Ministry of Transport in that regard. So I guess just a bit of reassurance that the conversations are happening, and it would be to have the RA engaged in some of those conversations. And in that regard, we have an EV working group that we started several years ago through the Department of Energy with the industry. So the members include all of the importers, distributors of vehicles, of EVs on the island, the rental companies with the mini cars, micro cars, even the some of the importers of motorcycles as well, world distributors, etc. Because obviously, as some of you know, they're starting to import electric bikes and motorcycles now as well. So yes, the conversations are happening. And again, Denton, it would be great to have the RA involved in those conversations when it becomes, pertinent, or you want to contribute, I guess.
Yeah, I can definitely put up the RA's hand on behalf of the RA. Put up our hand. I'm definitely happy to be involved with work that's already going on. We don't want to reinvent the wheel or set anybody back, but we're happy to join existing efforts and bring whatever we can to the table.
Yeah, that's fantastic to hear a partner. And if you want to say something. But yeah, that's great to hear. And I hope that, we can get some actual traction in terms of legislative changes. I think we've been talking about these things for a long time. So it is encouraging to hear that, ministerially things are being progressed and there's now good synergy with RMI and the RA. But I hope that we can actually just get some policies in place with action on the ground, because that's really what we need. We need to make it happen. And in that regard, I was just going to
jump in.
Yeah, you go ahead, Denton.
Okay, thanks. I was just going to say on that point about changes. One of the things I've learned in this role, because this is completing my third year now at this point, is the amount of effort by all parties involved to make a legislative change. It is not insignificant by any means, and a lot of acts. I will think of the Electricity Act, the RAA, the Electronic Communications Act. They are so interwoven that you have to go through so many steps to validate that you're not creating a new problem. that I did not have an appreciation for how much effort goes into that. We recently completed some reviews of our legislation. I think it took like a sustained year's worth of meetings every week to get to that point. So, like I said, I didn't have that appreciation coming into it, that this is how much work it takes. So I do appreciate the work that people like Aaron put into doing these things, because it's not easy. And it still has to go to the Attorney General and to the Cabinet and then ultimately to Parliament, so it's a long road.
Yeah, agreed. And just to finish off on the charging portion, because that is now, that would not be a TCD issue. The charging aspect, to me, looks like more of a regulatory and a grid issue. Where are we at with beta testing chargers for a vehicle to whom? Is there a sandbox ready for that? Are there certain charges that have already been identified by the RA and perhaps Balco as acceptable? How does industry assist in that regard? How do we go ahead and get some of these test projects going?
Oh, I actually think that, and I don't want to speak for the electric vehicle working group, but that to me should be a subcommittee part of that. The RA has started looking at some of these things, started looking at various commercial products that are available and technically can be used today, right? It's really nothing stops you from disconnecting your home from the grid and powering it from your car. But there's no organized framework for how to do it, or what equipment, or here are standard designs for you to use. And that's what probably needs to come out of that. So the RA has started looking into what would a formal V2H program look like for Bermuda. So we've started scoping that work. It might wind up in next year's work plan, but we'll get there by hopefully before significant demand is there, so that people can have guidance on how to install. And even but you have certified people that are going to do it for you, because most people won't do it themselves. But we are starting to look at that already. We have launched that effort. Vehicle to grid is the one that's further away. You know, it's much more complex. It's more economic. It's more price signal issues, et cetera.
So Denton, if I can just jump in, I guess what I could suggest is I'll reach out to you offline, and then we can talk further about, you know, all those good ideas you've just mentioned here, and in terms of the context of the EV working group.
Sure, no problem.
Okay.
Thanks, Aaron.
I did want to ask about virtual power plants, but I also am mindful if other folks here have questions, I want to make sure they get time.
Well, I can quickly speak to that, because I think we are contemplating in the amendments to Electricity Act some changes that will allow demand side resources to be aggregated. It's basically what a VIPP would, or VPP would wind up being. It's just that you'd be aggregating only power producing resources instead of some that absorb power, maybe. But you know, that is something that's considered in the licensing regime, I believe, changes.
And for those on the call that may not understand, and just to make sure I'm on the same page, we're talking about a bunch of residential clients have battery storage, and maybe it's only 1 unit of storage per each residential home, but once 1,000 units get deployed, and these are future-proofed, smart grid-ready battery storage systems, then the utility can see that they need for an increase in electricity on the grid to keep it stable, and that would require $1 million to turn on a turbine. But if they instead send a signal to discharge from 1,000 battery systems, then it would only cost $500,000. And then, so they send a signal. The consumer has already given authority and agreement for that to happen. The regulatory authority has already set up their framework to allow that. And in an ideal world, the homeowner or the property owner would then get some sort of shared value from that. So the utility saves some money, and the homeowner saves some money or is rewarded, and then society is rewarded by less polluting assets. Is that what we're talking about?
That's a part of it. Other parts of it would be, as an example, a developer may wish to develop 500 homes, and they would negotiate a power purchase agreement so that they would produce, power above, or at utility scale. So not at the smaller scale, individual scales. All of those resources, like solar panels on rooftops, would be aggregated under that one license. And then all of the people that participate would have their own commercial arrangements with that developer, and developer holds a license to carry up to X amount of capacity or whatever. So there's different iterations. And with the scenario you provided with like demand asset aggregation, you take it a step further, and this is where the vehicle to grid becomes useful, because if you replace that scenario, instead of storage at the home, or enhance it by having storage at the home and a car at the home, now your car, if it's participating in that pool and provide energy back to the grid when it needs it, actually starts to help pay for itself. So, there's a lot of possibility going forward. The main thing to consider is it cheaper for us to use the resources we have more efficiently, and to pay the owners, the distributed owners of those resources by whichever means, whether it's through a virtual power plant or license or whatever, or to continue to build. The problem with continuing to build is you also need to dispose afterwards. So you always got these costs that you're constantly fighting. So it's generally better to just be more efficient with what you already have. But it's not straightforward. Example, electric vehicle car, You know, you buy it, you typically have a warranty for a certain amount of use. And they have a planned expected life of the battery, say 10 years, 20 years, whatever. And once a vehicle battery gets to like 80% of capacity, it can't charge, and typically that's the end of life, and it either gets used as a battery for something else or gets recycled. If you start regularly, now we shouldn't because only got grids that volatile, but who knows what the future might be. If you start regularly having heavy drawdowns on your vehicle battery, will it shorten the life of that battery? Will it affect the warranty on that battery? You know, what impacts is it putting on you? So if you now potentially have to replace that battery sooner, then any payment that you're getting compensated with should have a depreciation in it to offset the wear and tear on your battery. So there's all of those sort of things that start going into it, price signals, and you know, so it makes economic sense for someone that has a vehicle that's parked in their yard to discharge and participate in the program, or just not participate, right? And a lot of times it comes down to what's the benefit, what's the cost.
Absolutely, many thanks.
Yeah, does anyone else have any?
Yeah, no problem.
Other questions for Denton? Thank you for that, Stuart, and Aaron also, thank you for your contributions. I have a couple more, but all right, I'll ask mine then, Denton. So
go for it.
How do we expect all this to impact the existing utility? Because my understanding of what's happening is that, you know, we're diversifying our energy generation. And so, you know, the project by the airport, that's controlled and managed by a different company. And if we have, you know, wind farms projects, if we have other utility scale solar projects, while these could be owned and operated by the existing utility, they also could be owned and operated by other companies. So with them being a major employer on the island, and obviously, you know, we appreciate that they own the grid, what's the intended impact? And our conversations currently going on about how to manage that?
A bit of both. So conversations are happening about a number of things, but we want the more sustainable energy environment more than being so concerned about the commercial. We're not ignoring it, but it's not our primary driver. So what we're trying to do is one of those trade-offs, right? We don't want our utility to collapse because it's inadequately funded, and they're not reinvesting, and you start having critical failures. But what we do want is these, as you see in the IRP, these new resources to come to market. So what we do allow them to do is to participate. If they wish to be involved in this new energy future, then, you know, as I told them not too long ago, bring your A game, right? You need to be the best in the shop because you're going to be the one that's scrutinized artists. And you need to prove it, right? So, and certainly has indicated that they have strong interest in that, and they already have demonstrated they have a portfolio of the same types of resources we're looking to build. So they aren't, I think, a lightweight in that area. Because what happens if you go to solicit wind and everyone says, I'm not interested, it's too small. I want to build, unless it's 300 megawatts, I don't want to talk about it, right? Because I can build something off the East Coast for 500 megawatts, and I don't want to commit my resources to your little project, unless you're waiting to wait 5 years or, you know. So it's good to have them available and interested. And it's also good because they will have a fairly realistic view, because they live here, of what it's going to cost to build something, and their pricing should discipline the market win. Having them involved has a lot of value. And then in terms of transition and employees and obsolescence technologies, that's a challenge we face on many fronts. It's not going to go away. Horse and buggy is really just for entertainment these days. Locomotives don't exist in Bermuda. Technology continues to move forward. We're even talking about another form, internal combustion cars becoming less and less of a presence in Bermuda. So I think the number one is going to be a combination of the company preparing its workforce as best as possible. And it won't be perfect no matter what they do, but they could be better organized for when transitions do come. And I think also, and this is more of a policy thing, but I'm not a politician and I don't have control of government, thankfully. We do need to have a more robust training facility or resource, not necessarily a facility, but resources to retrain. We are in a deficit of trade skills in Bermuda. So transitioning is probably going to be a challenge, but it's not insurmountable. And people need to start getting their heads around it, because we've already said it. It's in the IRP, and we've even told you when, right? So people need to start to organize and prepare for that, and it's just like everything else. These industries evolve, whether they're automotive, power, computers. It all evolves, and we all in our roles, I believe, have to constantly sharpen our skills and retool. So I think this is a part of that. Ultimate ownership may not be as much of it in a single licensee's hands. May wind up being multiple licensees, but that's the nature of a distributed grid, because as energy production becomes more and more cost effective at your location, at the customer's location, the more people will tend to disaggregate from the central system. And the way to keep people connected is through communications, through these various service providers. It's going to be less and less of the traditional one-stop shop to get all your energy needs. So it's just part of the evolution of the network. It's not unique to Bermuda at all. You want to preview, shoot over to Kauai in Hawaiian Islands and Oahu, et cetera. So there's a lot to see what's coming in the future, including the good and the bad. You can see Hawaii went through a period where it was just completely unchecked solar deployment. And as a result, when they had a small outage in the neighborhood, all the solar systems that were still producing when the grid disconnected created 300% electricity spikes and started blowing out people's appliances. So then the utility had to work with the IEEE and come up with new standards for inverters, that have ride-through capabilities so that they won't disconnect spuriously. And two, when they do need to disconnect, they do it rapidly so that they don't put excess energy into the grid after the grid's already collapsed. So there's a lot of stuff out there like that, and the interesting future for those that are interested in those sort of things. But that's what you can look, like I said, look ahead in the future a little bit by getting a postcard from the future, as they say about Hawaii. So.
All right.
Just another little plug, if I can, for the Department of Energy and the government, just piggybacking on what Denton is saying about reskilling as the energy transition that we're going to go to, because I think it's a very important point. And again, it is something that we have seen happening in other jurisdictions, and it is something that the government, specifically the Department of Energy, has been working with the likes of Workforce Development, Department of Workforce Development, the Bermuda College, and other entities, private entities, to start to consider what training programs, whether they be for solar PV training, making sure that local electricians are genned up on solar PV, and new modern systems of electricity, whether it's residential or commercial. And we're also just starting the same conversations with regard EVs as well. So though, you know, one of the benefits of owning an EV is there should be less maintenance. There'll be less requirements for regular maintenance, et cetera. So we might in fact see less requirements for skilled services or skilled labor in that field or that industry. There still will be a requirement for current mechanics, et cetera, to reskill and retrain. And I think you'll find that the positive thing is in the private industry already is some of the major dealers have already started down that road. They've already started with a large percentage of their, well, I shouldn't say large percentage, but a percentage of their current staff are being trained on EVs and reskilling, et cetera. So that's a positive sign that the industry is somewhat taking the lead in this regard. And again, hopefully the government is there or will be there to support them through the initiatives, as I say, with workforce development, the college, permitted college, et cetera.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. That's going to add one little bit to that as well. We even have seen emergency services have already trained up on various electric vehicle models. So just as an example, if an electric car flips over or gets submerged, how you disable that very intense energy source, right? So they've done training already on how to disable these vehicles, how to disconnect them in emergency scenarios, because you don't want to put the jaws of life through a active battery. That would not be good. So so it is already starting to progress, but each of us has to look at what's coming and actively prepare. We don't have the luxury of waiting until it's upon us to prepare for it.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah, we need to be proactive in making it happen.
Well, ultimately, Denton, it seems to me like the IRP is essentially a call to action, whereas it's like, okay, this is the plan, this is where we're heading, and everybody needs to look at how they can or need to adjust to fall in alignment with the direction that's being taken. It's interesting because I know a lot of organizations, especially looking at like environmental NGOs like Green Rock, and say, oh, everybody's about conservation and it's kind of like anti-progress and things of that nature. But what's been really interesting for me in this process of really engaging this energy transition is that it's actually going to require us to use more energy. So it's not really about like the amount of energy we're using, it's about how we're using it and how we're generating it. So one thing I know that we're looking to focus on from an awareness perspective is getting away from internal combustion engines, period, not just in cars, but if you think of everything from a chainsaw to a lawnmower to a generator to a weed whacker and things of that nature. So, and the technology is forthcoming. So already there are companies on the island that have solar generators, which are really like battery packs that you can charge up, either by plugging it in to your wall or by using a solar panel, and that can power things. I know, my company has already used them for different remote events for power, for PA systems and things of that nature. So that's already on the market. I have friends who now have weed whackers that are battery operated, so it's really cool. But the technology you have one already? All right, cool. Yeah, it's funny. One of my friends bought theirs
battery powered.
What's that?
Oh, sorry, I was just saying I have a hedge trimmer as well.
Oh, you have a hedge trimmer as well. So yeah.
Battery powered.
Yeah, so kind of these things,
I'm missing some tools.
Things are all coming in the market. And so it's really just the awareness of what we're using and how we're using it. Everybody, recognizes the importance of having a stable, reliable electricity source. And if anything, these initiatives should help to improve that. And as Stuart says all the time, just make it clean. Yeah. So Does anyone have any other questions or inputs? Any stories to tell? Any examples of what you're doing in your company or anything?
Yeah, I guess it's great to have a 50% electric fleet now for a couple of years, but I don't like being stagnant there. So I'm looking forward to delivering the fuel for the electric vehicles, being the solar, with an electric vehicle, ideally with some sort of crane to drop off a pallet of modules, or in an ideal world, similar to what Belka has with their bucket trucks, to be able to move a pallet of panels or tools up onto the roof to make it safer and less strenuous for the installation team. So, you know, we're really looking forward to 100% transition to an EV vehicle fleet. But it has been challenging. It's frustrating when you want something that's not there yet. So thank you, Denton, for the reminder of the Ford 150. We're probably not ready for that beast yet. I did look at the Alki that the Hamilton, the corporation of Hamilton has, and good for them taking that step. There's that little vehicle that delivers or picks up trash, and they've had that now, I think, close to a year. But what we're seeing is we just had a government PO confirmed today for electric chargers and installation. So it's really encouraging to see the transition. We're selling these variable speed pumps for water pressure, if we're now talking about the residential side and efficiency, and being prepared for a smart grid future. So much quieter pump. Could set it to whatever pressure you want to. You have a nice high pressure shower. It's not going to make a lot of noise, and it's going to kick in at a much lower RPM. We're really excited about the battery storage product that we're installing now, the Enphase Ensemble. It's pretty incredible, and it now comes with load control as a functionality. So this means that if the grid is down and your battery's getting full, like to 90% or whatever, you could tell it, look, when the battery gets to 90 and I'm off grid, instead of curtailing the charging from the solar, go ahead and charge my electric car. And then let that happen until the battery comes down to 70%. Or if the car is charged, then go ahead and turn the air conditioning on so I can have that luxury during an outage. So it's really exciting, the different controls and the future proofing of these technologies that we're installing now. And we're looking forward to getting more and more of that.
Exciting times ahead.
Yeah, definitely.
I do think it's going to reach a tipping point. So right now, what we're doing is kind of pushing a lot of this stuff over the hill, you know, up the hill. And you see that happening in the US and in Europe and in Asia in particular. But I think it's just going to flip, because I think from what I saw in one of the studies that it only takes a 10% decline in retail sales to basically make the whole retail network collapse. I don't know how accurate that is. That was based on US numbers. But that's not that far away in terms of Bermuda if you start switching large numbers of vehicles. So we also need to be prepared for that. What happens if you know, large-scale electric vehicles start becoming utilized, and you know, it becomes fundamentally uneconomic to run a retail gas station, right? Does that mean you have the opposite problem where people that are on fossil fuels now find that their supplies are extra high, or they have less fueling options, or who knows, right? So the transition is going to be challenging. I think it's going to probably happen fairly rapidly, because I think we're going to reach a point in the near future, particularly when great options are available to the market at good prices. Then I think it's going to, all bets are off.
Can I just again piggyback on Denton's great words there? In terms of Stuart, some of your comments about the challenge with adopting EVs or even getting EVs in Bermuda, etc. I think this is the kind of thing that we as the Department of Energy and our work with not just the Ministry of Transport, but also the Ministry of Public Works, who you got the PO for the charging infrastructure. These are the kind of, I guess, anecdotal information and data-driven information also that we would want to hear from fleet owners. Again, with RMI, we've been doing some quite in-depth analysis of different fleets across the island, including the government fleet, which is 600 plus vehicles. So piggybacking on what the good work that has been done at Belco already with their fleet transition, what's been done at the Corporation of Hamilton, as you mentioned a little earlier there with their fleet transition, understanding what are the challenges with fleet owners in terms of transition fleets to EVs. So if there's anyone else on the call or on the Zoom and they are fleet owners or are part of a fleet owner group, then again, I would encourage you to reach out to the Department of Energy. You can reach out to myself as the project manager, and I'll put my email in the chat because we'd like to hear from you as we go through this analysis of the different vehicle fleets on the island and understand these challenges. But we've done quite a lot of good work thanks to RMI and all of their heavy lifting as far as doing the analysis. And so we have a pretty good understanding of some of these challenges that we face moving forward, especially as a very small jurisdiction. Obviously, we don't have the economic clout sometimes when it comes to the types of models that are available elsewhere. So it's not just a physical limitation on the sizing because of our policies and restrictions. It's sometimes availability in our market because it's so small. So these are just a couple of things. But again, this is the purpose of the work that we're doing in the department and through the EV working group to try and to come up with data-based or data-informed and make data-informed decisions about what we can do as a jurisdiction to, to make some changes so that we're not left behind. But this also includes consultation with other jurisdictions. So those within the Caribbean region, for example, they're going through some of the same challenges. We're often lumped together with the other Caribbean islands just purely because of our size, never mind because of our historical connection with them, etc. So again, I would encourage us, and this is a great forum for it, to share more information and understand some of the challenges that we're having, whether it's related to EVs or electrical transition and energy transition conversations, for sure.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Denton. That was a very informative presentation. And thanks everyone for attending. Thank you for the questions. We had a very engaging conversation around a topic that we consider to be extremely critical to the future of the country. We look forward to contributing the best way that we can and to assisting with the process. And we hope that we have all of your support in that endeavor. It's something that we've learned is going to require input, effort, and responsibility from all of us throughout the country, at a residential level, at a government level, and in the private sector as well. And if we can all work together on it, then I feel that we have very promising days ahead. So I will do my best. I will look to get the presentation from Denton. As usual, we'll make a report. Fortunately, this was recorded, so it'll be available on our YouTube channel. So for anyone, if you want to be able to share this with your colleagues, it should be available by the end of the week. All right. But thanks again. I don't know if you had any closing words, Denton?
Just that, thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure to be able to present some of a very small part of what the RA is doing and plans to do. And I thank you for allowing me a little bit of time in your day to explain what we're up to and how you can help us move the ball up the field. So thank you very much.
All right. All right. And again, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the day, and we'll be sharing more information about our future green building forums online. All right, so give thanks, peace and love.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
All right.
Yeah.